Hello, this is the Bureau of Lost Culture. I'm Stephen. I was never going to be a nice little white girl, she said. But instead, she became an underground musician, then had hit records with a two-tone band Selector, became a style icon, actor, TV presenter, and now author. In the late 70s and early 80s, Margaret Thatcher was reshaping Britain and promoting her own very particular vision of what it meant to be British from the door of Downing Street in Westminster in London. And meanwhile, in the urban jungle of Coventry in the Midlands, a young woman whose image could not be more different than Maggie's was presenting a very different vision of what it meant to be British. She says you grow your identity over time, and she should know. Belinda Magnus, born 23rd of October 1953, was given away as a baby by her white unmarried mother and a then unknown black father. Adopted by a white family and renamed Pauline Vickers, she grew up in a completely white neighbourhood as the only child of colour and experienced firsthand the often prevalent racist attitudes of that time. She's written a book about her times, Black by Design, a film, a two-tone story has been made about her life, and she came to the Bureau to talk all about it and about how she became Pauline Black. But more on that in a bit. My thanks this time go to James McEwen again, Roddy Lambert, who sends me terrific psychedelic sounds, Stuart Fleming, Matt Pike, Pat Thomas, Guy Thomas for their suggestions. Keep them coming. They are much appreciated, as is your appreciation or reviews or just recommendations to other countercultural friends who might enjoy these stories. You can find us and become part of our counterculture community at bureauoflostculture.com. Thanks to Vanessa and Colm from Dock and Roll, who introduced me to Pauline, who was showing the film Two-Tone Story. Thanks to Adrian at Soho Radio, who used to play with the Selector and who made a track with Pauline back in the day, which we're going to hear during this episode. Pauline's still touring the world with the Selector. She's still feisty, very funny, and she's sitting opposite me looking very stylish. Welcome to the Bureau of Lost Culture, Pauline Black. Welcome, Pauline.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
It says here, Belinda Magnus was born October 23, 1953.
Yeah, makes me 71.
Come on, what's the secret?
There is no secret. It's certainly no secret when I look in the mirror first thing in the morning.
I'm thinking Pauline Black, Dorian Gray.
Well, you see, I have a really dreadful picture of myself in my attic.
Absolutely do not look 71.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you.
Listen, let's wind the clock back to 1953, Romford, when you manifest.
I actually manifested in Coggeshall. That's where I was born. I was born in an unmarried mother's home, as they called them, a mother and baby home, which is a little bit like a baby supermarket.
It was an orphanage or something, wasn't it? What's the first thing you remember?
Puking all over my mother's lovely iron sheets. That's the first thing I actually remember, and she had told me that I was adopted, which came as a bit of a shock, really, and that they weren't my real mum and dad.
You were only 4, were you?
You know, and if I'd been wondering, which I hadn't really been wondering up until then, why I happened to be a different colour than the family that I was adopted into, it was a little bit like, well, when you start school, which is quite soon, people are going to wonder. So you go armed with this.
They were anticipating that.
Yes.
And your adoptive mum thought, right, I better tell her now.
Yeah. And then they tell you this old garbage about, that makes you special. Which it doesn't really.
But it kind of does in a way,
well,
though, because I
it
think...
depends what you consider special. It wasn't something to go away and sort of, you know, these days you may well decide that, you know, one is quite special or something. And because we have a very different idea about what African countries are. But in those days, no. I mean, it was the only things really you saw about other black people. Well, there was a lot of pygmies on our television screens back in those days. Leni Riefenstahl, I think, one of the old Hitler's propagandists, had done a lot of filming of those, and such people would turn up on the screen every now and again. Also, there would be sundry kind of either slaves or porters or servants of some kind, or
in movies,
in movies. And that was my sum total of ever really seeing black people in this kind of backwater.
The hideous kind of caricature of the black and white minstrel.
Well, yes, and I mean, my parents liked that. I mean, and they weren't any different from any others, you know. I mean, I don't want to make it seem like, oh my God, they were racist and the whole street wasn't. I mean, they didn't even know they were racist. I mean, the word hadn't been coined then. There was no notion of anything like multiculturalism in those days.
Well, let's dig into that a bit, because your first memory is you throwing up when your adoptive mum says, "Oh, you're not actually my natural daughter."
All I knew was I wasn't theirs. I wasn't meant to be here.
And you had this visceral reaction to
Yeah.
it, which is you threw. And how did she respond when you threw up?
Fairly angry, and sort of gave me a slap, and I toddled upstairs and sort of cried a bit. Had a look at myself in the mirror and thought, okay, so I'm a black girl.
Is that what you thought?
Yeah, I mean, she didn't use those words, you know. I mean, they had a different terminology in those days, which was coloured.
Right. So let's set the scene for listeners in Romford and Essex. Your adoptive parents have brought you into their family. Why?
My adoptive parents were older.
Yeah.
They were probably in their mid-40s when they had me. My mother had I suppose you call it a stroke, but she'd had Bell's palsy, and it caused half of her face to drop slightly. She wouldn't go out. She was very conscious of it. And the doctor turned around to her and says, "What you need is a baby."
It's sort of astounding, isn't
Well,
it?
not really in
It
those
isn't?
days.
Really?
No. I
Really?
mean, it is through our eyes these days, but in those days, it was like the panacea for all women was have a baby. You know, be married. But, you know, baby, that'll sort you out.
That'll cheer you up.
That'll cheer you up, exactly. Do something useful, love, kind of thing.
So they decide that they're going to adopt a child, and they go
Yeah.
to the orphanage.
And they have 4 sons already, but they're growing up. You know, the youngest one by that time is 8 years old.
And they chose you.
Yes, I mean, somebody pointed them in the correct direction, and it was all done through the church. People who were involved in church and charities, and I mean, that was how these things got done. Well, they wanted a girl, which was quite lucky because there was me. And if they'd wanted a boy, I suppose they would have, you know, passed by, and my whole life might have been different. Story my youngest brother tells me, and bear in mind he was 8 at the time, was, "Oh, we just took you then and there and brought you home. We didn't have anything, so you slept in a drawer for a while." And so it was all a bit like that, very ad hoc, very kind of, you know, Heath Robinson sort of crib. My natural mother, my birth mother, used to come for a while to visit, to bring money. Money came in postal orders in those days. For 18 months, I was fostered. Then it went to court when I was 18 months old. And by that time, I'd been living with this family. I was 4 weeks old, I think, when they actually got hold of me the first. Papers were signed. Then your birth mother, in those days, couldn't come anywhere near you or see you. But apparently she did. She used to come and stand at the bottom of the road and see me go to school and stuff like that.
Very sort of haunting image, isn't it?
Well, it is a haunting image. I'm not so much for me. For her, I just can't imagine what that must have been like. Because, I mean, I'd have been very easy to pick out, you know, even if she hadn't seen me for a few years.
And she didn't want to give you up, did she?
No, she didn't. She didn't want to give me up, but her parents were not very amenable to me being around at all.
So she'd had a baby outside marriage, mixed race. That was the issue.
Yeah, well, any baby considered out of wedlock at that time, I mean, was a bastard and was, you know, treated accordingly. But mixed race baby, well, I mean, that was beyond the pale in those days. And so she was sent away so nobody would see the baby, and she would come back when she wasn't looking pregnant anymore. And then everybody knew what had happened, probably. My adoptive parents went there, so my younger brother tells me, to see her parents because she hadn't sent a postal order for a few weeks. And so they were a bit upset about that. And basically they were just told to get back in the taxi and never come there again because they took me with them.
Your natural grandparents didn't want to see you.
No.
Wanted to pretend it never happened.
Yeah.
You said later, I was never going to be a nice little white girl. That's really what my family wanted.
That whole thing of breed the black out of you, basically. So, it might sound harsh, but that is the terminology I use. They had quite strange notions, I tend to think, well, certainly my mother did, about black people.
You sort of understood that in some way being black was bad?
Yes. That was her way of thinking it. Most people, particularly in Essex...
Let's address that.
I don't think people understand what life was like then because we're looking at it through the prism of now.
We're sitting here in London in 2025.
Exactly.
And London is a very cosmopolitan...
And has been for years.
For many, many years. But this is not London. This is Essex.
Yeah.
It's, as you say, also a place where the National Front had representatives. And in fact, one of your adoptive uncles was either a member of the National Front, and for people who don't know what there is anymore, he agreed you're not pal, so what we these days call a definite racist. You're in this situation, you're the only mixed-race little girl and then girl in the street, in the school, in the area. So every time you step out the door in a way...
It's kind of reinforced in that way.
Were you always conscious of that like, it's just me?
Yes. Yes, I think that I was always conscious of it. I always felt that I had to excel in some way just to be passable.
In fact, you did excel at school, didn't you? I mean, you're a brainy kid.
Yeah, but I mean, again, it's not just colour. I mean, it's also class, isn't it? We had this teacher, this English teacher, who one day just sort of strolled into the classroom and wanted to know what newspaper our parents read.
To work out what class they were?
Yeah, exactly.
What newspaper did your parents read?
News of the World. What else? News of the World and the Sunday Mirror. You know what I mean? Then I became aware that there were things called broadsheets. There were things called The Guardian and the Daily Telegraph and things like this. And
thankfully, no defunct News of the World.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right. Bottom of the pile, right. We talk about 50s, then into the 60s. Now, there's a whole other thing which starts in the 60s, particularly around here, the counterculture. But you realise that these attitudes, which to us might seem totally weird now, right, they were sort of pretty common, weren't they?
Oh, totally.
And you've got a situation, I was thinking, it's sort of the end of the empire. The empire's fallen. Not quite. It's more colonial now, right, than the actual sort of the old empire. You've got the kind of loss of that, the loss of face or whatever it was. And you've also got the immigration from the Caribbean, same time, around about this time as well, and from the Indian subcontinent, haven't you? So,
for people, we don't like that, they would say.
I think there's one guy in the film, but he says, very noisy.
Noisy foreigners.
It's a strange phrase. Couldn't work out whether he was objecting to the fact they were foreign or they were noisy or a bit of both.
No. In my family, it was... people absolutely hated it if they were in a hospital waiting room and somebody was talking a different language to what they were talking. And if they had a dark skin as well, then, I mean, it was, compounded.
That was noisy. They should be quiet.
Exactly. Or at least talking English.
Your mum also used to do this thing where if you'd take you somewhere, she'd always say, she's adopted,
You have to think about how people are viewing something in those days, right? I'm a little black kid trailing along on her hand. And people look at that, and we're talking post-Second World War, so there were other children around, not necessarily in Romford that I ever saw, but there were other children around that was, say, the progeny of black GIs and things like that, particularly as you got out to sort of towards Norfolk or somewhere like there where there had been army bases. So people had an opinion about what sort of woman you were because you had a black child. So I had to be explained if she was on her own.
So your mum was forestalling them thinking, oh, has she had an affair with the black man?
Exactly.
Quickly by saying she's adopted, right?
That's how white women thought in those days.
What about your dad? How was your relationship with your dad?
I just thought he was wonderful. I thought he looked vaguely like Humphrey Bogart. That did it. He loved hats. And that was the
Excellent.
days when, till kind of, mid 60s or whatever. I mean, everybody wore sort of trilbies, and if you were a man, and horrible little white hats and white gloves if you were a woman at that time. He was a mechanic. I mean, there wasn't anything he didn't know about cars. I mean, he could listen to an engine and know exactly what was going on with it, what was wrong with it, and blah, blah, blah. The transporters that were used to transport Ford cars around, he sort of, took charge of those.
Yeah,
there was something wrong with them.
Very big, wasn't it?
Huge. I mean, in Dagenham. So that's where he
yeah,
worked.
yeah.
That's where he worked.
Yeah.
And of course, there had been immigration into this country from the Caribbean. So they had black workers there who at that time were not treated at all well. And I mean, I know that just from hearing my dad talk about it, but also from personal experience hearing guys in the band talk about it, because some of them had worked at Vauxhall in Luton and stuff. But I very much remember him saying one time that there was a black guy at work. He'd been having a bit of trouble from some of the others, and he stuck up for him. And I remember thinking, well, that's a cool thing to do. I didn't really think much more of it than that, but I thought at least he has his priorities right. And another time when we were in the realms of boyfriends, and I'd gone away to Lancaster Polytechnic, Coventry University as it is now, and I brought home a boyfriend who happened to be white. He only had one eye, and he was pretty weird, and I mean, he was kind of, a total hippie, and wore a brown nurse's cloak, because, people were a bit strange then. And I thought, I'm not sure whether I can actually take him home. So I said, well, look, you wait here, hide round the corner kind of thing. I went and knocked on the door. And I said to my mum, I said, look, I brought this boyfriend home with me. And her first words were, he's black, isn't he? And I said, no, he's not. And by that time, my dad had come to the door. And he'd heard this exchange. And he just turned around to my mum and he said, Ivy, I don't care what colour he is. If my girl likes him, then, that'll do for me. So this guy kind of appears out of the shadows, and my mother heaves a great sigh of relief. He's
only
not
got
black.
one eye. He's dressed in a cape.
He's dressed in a nurse's cape. That would do. Craziness. Yeah,
a few. Right,
yeah, we're saved.
You'd said also, she sort of were trying to teach you that black men were to be avoided.
Yeah.
They were risky.
Yeah. I mean, in my mother's head, all black men only wanted one thing. So I had no idea what white men wanted. But I mean, that one thing, as all women did at that time, was, obviously sex. I suppose her whole knowledge of what black people were came from the News of the World. Well, I mean, the News of the World only ever reported risque stories. And it was a racist rag itself, really. She would read it from cover to cover every Sunday, and her worst fears were always realised.
What about your brothers?
The oldest one was 21, and he just got married when I was born and lived somewhere else. I mean, none of them were racist towards me. I didn't grow up with them as brothers. So I kind of grew up as an only child.
You described it as you had to build a suit of armour around you as well.
Yes.
And also that you withdrew into yourself, but you had this interior life.
Yeah. The subject of race came up a lot. They would talk about coloured people, and it would always be talked about in not a good way. Some misdemeanour had been done by them, or always leaving their babies behind, and there's all this crap going on in their heads about the black population which had come into the country. A lot of the time was because, these guys had come here to work, so their families had been left at home. They had to raise enough money to bring their families in. So, yes, they were lone men, but I mean, they were seen as preying upon young white girls or whatever. Colonial way of looking.
I mean, that went right the way back to the 19th century with the Chinese and anybody who came to London. All teenagers have an interior life in a way. That's part of going from a child to a teenager. Yeah. You're separate. But I think in this case, you said once you've been othered by this stuff of race, you're on the outside, you're looking in. So it's an extra layer, isn't it, of being interior in a way.
Yeah, it is an extra layer. I mean, I don't want to make it sound as though, some dissociative personality process is going on here. I think what I was trying to say by that was that I was privy to them just talking amongst themselves and the things that they said, which were actually quite shocking, or certainly would be considered shocking by most kind of normal thinking and evolved people these days. But I heard that, so I have a very, very good notion of what racist people in this country actually think. I heard it all that time.
So you get a perspective about what the culture's actually like, which if you're inside the culture, you don't get that same view.
There's no reason to have a different perspective, is there? Why would you have? Therefore, it makes your antennae quite sensitive in a room, or how you're being perceived, or all of those things.
Your relationship with your mum seemed, unlike your relationship with dad, seemed quite fractious.
Well, yes, it was, but only because of all this stuff. If I didn't please her in some way, the things she wanted me to do and the way she wanted me to be, that she would be unhappy. And, she had a very good way of looking unhappy. And then you felt guilty, because always you were supposed to be very, very grateful that you had ended up there and that you weren't in an orphanage. So you were in a catch-22, really.
So when you said, I decided then and then I had to get out, is that when it first sort of like the seed of that was planted?
The seed of that was planted then. Yeah. I was nearly 11 then, and I was nearly about to go to senior school. And opinions were beginning to form in me then, and would solidify during that time. And as you say, teenage years for everybody, you're making your own opinions. Your parents don't know about that because you don't tell them. Looking at stories differently. A black kid reads bloody Robinson Crusoe in a very, very different way to what a white kid does. And Huckleberry Finn, the black guy's got green teeth, you're told. And you're not invested in who the hero of the story is. You're invested in something else, what the anomaly is. And as you get older, there's all the Jane Eyres, the Mad Woman and the Lofton things. She's a Creole. Not that people kind of knew that then, but you learn that later. But you did wonder about her. You knew that it had been some other country. All of these things you're coming to terms with. There was Martin Luther King, the whole civil rights movement at that time, Malcolm X, all of this.
You said I had to find a new family, and the first way that I did that was in newspapers and on TV, because this is the 60s, right?
Yeah.
Born 53, so by the time you're
15.
12, so you've got Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Angela Davis, Marsha Hunt. They've got afros. They're very different, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Projecting a very different image.
And looking cool as hell.
Looking super cool, right? The music, of course, is coming, and music played by black people, super cool. Mm-hmm. So you suddenly got this different vision, right, of what it is and what you've been told it is.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking what a relief it must have been to sort of see that in a magazine, in a newspaper, or on the TV.
It's a relief in one way, but it's only a relief, if you like, if other people see it as super cool too, which they didn't. Not at my school necessarily, anyway. I liked it. I thought, right, that's mine. This is mine. I can relate to that. It wasn't like that you felt super cool because there were black people around and they were on top of the pops or ready, steady, go, or any of those kinds of things.
But you're hearing Martin Luther King, you're hearing Malcolm X speaking. Right.
Yes. You're then having to dissect something like I had a dream. I dream of a time when a little black kid and a little white kid can go to school together. And that on news channels and things like this, you're seeing black people being beaten because they want to sit at a lunch counter. You also know a church in Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama, is blown up, and the kids that are there that end up dead, your colour and your age. That's a lot to take on. And then, of course, there's the whole business of kids being able to go to school, to go to university there, and the baying white crowds. You see pictures of this and you think, well, everything just seems all a bit wrong. But somewhere, people think differently to what they think here.
Consciousness arising for you then? An awakening?
Oh, totally. By the time I was 15, I was a fully paid up member of Black Powerism of one, a club of one, getting pictures of black fists on walls and stuff.
What was it like with the other kids at school then?
I didn't discuss it with them. There wasn't really anything to discuss. None of our school subjects took into terms anything like that. So this was just like some extracurricular thing that I had with the library, basically, looking at books that were probably outside of my range of age at the time, but were discussing things that I thought were interesting.
Because the counterculture's happening, but maybe not in that part of Essex.
It was never really happening too much in Essex.
Not to be withering about that, but it's just that, you know, when we often talk about the counterculture, it's probably in the cities.
It was in the big cities, and people much older than what one was at that time, but that didn't make them not interesting. Countercultures, there was always a small segment of people really that were into that. I mean, most youngish people at that time liked whatever was delivered on the radio, in the charts, all of that, kind of whatever the fashion was they got from Jackie or some other god-awful bloody girls magazine, I should think. They were probably all dreaming that men were going to sweep them off their feet and they were going to have 2.4 kids by the time they were in their mid-20s. That was what they wanted. It wasn't really anything that I wanted. That was the first place. I always remember the day that I decided I wanted to look like Angela Davis and Marsha Hunt, because they were both around at the time. And Hair was playing in London. And I just thought, right, I'm just going to freak my hair out, which I did. And just turned up in school with this huge afro. And I always remember walking into the class. And it was just, all the guys were just completely struck dumb by this. Even the teacher was. Because it was not seen. I mean, it was a statement. It was a statement. I didn't realise it was a statement so much at the time, but I mean, it really was the first piece of identity that I actually put into place that said, OK, I'm taking control from here on in.
Was that the first afro in Romford?
It was the first afro, certainly in our school.
So roll on 17, then you decide you're going to go to Lanchester Polytechnic, Coventry University as it is now, right? Now, if you look at these sort of signposts along the road to becoming who you became, that seems a significant decision because, well, obviously Coventry's played such a huge part in your life since then. Did you have a sense of what was going on in Coventry?
No, not at all. I applied to 3 different ones. Coventry came back with an offer to do combined science, so off I toddled. I'd only done science subjects. Nobody else was doing it, so I was the only woman in the class and the only black woman in the class. It was 100 miles away from my mother. That meant that she couldn't get there easily, and I didn't have to go home that easily.
It feels random, but it also feels like destiny taking a hand there somehow.
Well,
bearing in
maybe.
mind what
happens.
happens.
I'm a great believer in serendipity, entanglement, you call it what you will. I do believe that there is something like that kind of going on out there.
You go to Coventry, and then this is where you get your own family, isn't it? What was it about Coventry at that time? We're talking about, 1971?
71,
right.
Going into 72.
Yeah.
Caribbean immigration had also come in there. And
well, you had quite a mix, didn't you? Because you had Pakistani, Irish, Indian, Caribbean.
Yeah, Poles.
You got Poles, right? You've got the car industry again, haven't you? Like Dagenham.
But everybody came there, I mean, for that. I mean, it was a little bit like Detroit, I suppose.
So you've got a proper mixing pot, haven't you?
And it was a wonderful mixing pot, I mean, in those culturally. And obviously Coventry is the city of peace and reconciliation because of what happened to it during the war. It was bombed so badly, so it had to regrow, and it was new and, you know...
It was flattened, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was flattened. But then you had brutalist architecture after that kind of thing, a whole kind of concrete jungle. And I just found it infinitely interesting because it was just so different from Romford. So I just got out of there and got in with some hippie-ish, druggy types. And
it's funny seeing you in the film as a sort of hippie. Seeing you later than seeing you now, you know. But you're a proper hippie, weren't you? You got the afro, you got the caftan, beads,
moth-eaten fur coat,
strumming acoustic guitar, very sweet voice, different voice than you had later, really, isn't it? Yeah. Do you ever sort of put the caftan on, pick up the acoustic guitar for?
What do you think?
I think you probably do, actually.
No, I don't.
Privately, you don't want to be caught doing it, right?
No, you don't want to be caught.
No, but you say you listened to prog rock. I mean, that was the time, wasn't it?
That was the time. I mean, by the time I got to Polly. Great bands there, but I mean, the very first band I ever saw were MC5, closely followed by Pentangle.
Quite a contrast.
Yeah, quite a contrast. And so, and the wonderful world of Arthur Brown at the time, who would turn up in a papier-mâché brain and sort of leap around and do fire and things like this. It was just fun. People were into the Floyd, proggy, rocky kind of things. Yes. During that time, I left there because I didn't really know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing: I didn't want to end up in a laboratory. You very quickly find out whether you're suited to that or you're not suited to that. And I thought, I don't want no part of this. And also, I'd met my husband by that time. He worked at Rolls-Royce, and he was a bit of a hippie in himself.
You're still together? Decades later?
53 years later.
53 years later. He's a writer on Marxism, is that right?
Yeah.
So he's a political animal.
Yeah. He's also 86 now.
But that's an incredible relationship, isn't it? You met quite young. And you're still together?
Yeah, I was 18.
That's a long time together. But you had an open relationship. I guess at the time was maybe not so unusual.
Lots of people did. People managed it in varying ways at the time.
Tell us about how you met him.
We met in Gestalt therapy.
In a sort of group?
In a group. It was an encounter group at the time. There were two people. They were American, Denny and Leda. They ran encounter groups in London, and they had come up to the Polly, and it was, hey, do you want to come to an encounter group? And I went along with my hippie-ish kind of friends, and Terry knew some people within that circle, but he worked outside, you know.
He worked for Rolls-Royce?
He worked for Rolls-Royce at that time, but he was there. And
what happens in an Gestalt therapy encounter group?
You could pretty much talk about whatever you wish to talk about, but you could also confront other people.
So you and Terry encountered, and in fact leads to your relationship, leads to your marriage,
Oh,
right?
we just decided to get out of the encounter group.
Can't just encountering each other privately.
I mean, it was infinitely more interesting, I have to say. Yeah. I didn't know that then, but I've always liked a collaborative process because it's the most interesting. Put it this way, there's the Jerry Dammers way of doing things, which is...
Benevolent dictator?
Yes, benevolent dictator kind of thing. And there's somebody who just likes collaboration and saying, look, I've done this, have a listen to this. And, oh, you've done that, well, that's great. But what if you did this?
And speaking of collaborations, here's that track that you did with Adrian Meehan. Adrian, of course, pilot of Soho Radio, but back in the day was drumming for the Selector. You did this collaboration, which he just unearthed for the first time in years. So let's have a listen.
Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Negro, nigger, wog, jungle bunny. Laugh, you coon, don't you think that's funny? Spade, chickaboo, sambo, darky. For those who are poets, just plain Paddy Malarkey. Bignami, half-caste, burrhead and blackie. But why stop there? Let's get seriously wacky. Quadroon, high yellow, octoroon and lily skin. Mulatto, half-breed, half-jack, mongrel. This is the shape our culture's in. But hey, I'm keeping the trees clean. I'm keeping the trees clean. I'm keeping the trees clean. How does it feel to truly belong? To know how you act can rarely be wrong. To choose a career where your expectations are high. How does it feel to truly belong? To know how you act can rarely be wrong. To choose a career where your expectations are high. To look everyone else square in the eye. Not to be blamed for each indiscretion. Conscious of leaving a negative impression. Analysing every move that you make, in every minute from the time that you wake. Repeating a sentence again and again to somebody who's decided you've less of a brain. Hassling for every crumb from the table, from the time you were birthed and climb out of the cradle. Breaking your back because you leant too far over to accommodate those rolling in clover. Assimilating patterns of human behaviour where everything's white, including the saviour. But hey, I'm keeping the trees clean. I'm keeping the trees clean. I'm keeping the trees clean.
So we're in Coventry. You meet Lawton Brown, right, black musician, and then he introduces you to a different kind of black music, right? Last Poets, political, basically. Gil Scott-Heron, political.
Richie Havens.
Richie Havens, right? This is kind of consciousness-raising stuff as well, isn't it, right?
I had been listening to people like Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, and all of those people who were around at that time. But I mean, particularly Dylan and the different subjects that he drew upon. One of my favourite songs is probably Oxford Town, which basically tells the story of trying to get an education if you're black and in the southern states of America. And he seemed to have a very kind of visceral way of approaching that particular problem, which nobody else was at that time.
Yeah, right. Let's just forward wind to punk. Many people I've interviewed who were around at that time talk about the revolutionary impact it had on them. Either, okay, some people saw the Pistols, some people didn't and stuff, but it was like this kind of shock therapy or something, this thing erupting. Was it like that for you?
I admired what was going on. I loved the way that, kind of that dreadful sort of Sex Pistols interview on the TV and stuff like this. I mean, I loved all that. I couldn't see, I suppose, kind of where it was all going to lead. But then polystyrene came along and I saw someone who looked vaguely like me.
You're seeing somebody and thinking, okay, that could be me.
It was, the tin helmet, the kind of the braces on the teeth. She wasn't trying to be super cool. She just was. I hated all that kind of fashion business and the bondage stuff. But there was wonderful Polly, in her old crimpline skirt and stuff like this. And she just looked amazing. It was her and her take on it. And I mean, punk is an idea. What am I against? Well, what have you got kind of thing. Reggae was more interesting, though, to me at that time. The Last Poets were more interesting to me. I was desperate to know some other black people. I didn't really care who. I just needed some black faces in my world. And obviously, I'd met black people by that time because I worked in the NHS. I mean, it was... but, they were nurses or other technicians that worked within hospitals and stuff. There seemed to be this whole kind of other world out here that Lawton Brown kind of introduced me to. And a lot of those people would then become members of the Selector. So
I want to drop in something for listeners here because it's Pauline Black, musician, style icon, actor, TV presenter, author, and, let's not forget, radiographer.
Yeah. Not an orifice I haven't been up with something horrible, yeah.
You're starting to play music with these people too, right? And so moving away from the folky stuff.
Folk is something that, among young black people at that time who were into reggae is just so far out there. I mean, you just can't even get a handle on it kind of thing.
No bass.
No bass, yeah, that's probably it.
The other thing which happens at this time is this Eric Clapton racist rant. Really shocking. And I thought, it's unbelievable.
Unbelievable, yeah. He just went on for ages. That's not a drunken rant.
Here is a sidebar about Eric Clapton's racist rant. In 1976, the UK was a country on edge. Enoch Powell's anti-immigration rhetoric had taken root in parts of the population, a bleak response to poverty and change. And that same year, at a concert in Birmingham, Eric Clapton stunned fans with a drunken rant that echoed Powell's divisive views. Instead of just playing music, he delivered a tirade, spouting slurs and called for a white Britain. It was a shocking moment, especially coming from a man so deeply influenced by black blues musicians. He began by addressing the crowd. Do we have any foreigners in the audience tonight? If so, put up your hands. Where are you? Well, wherever you are, I think you should all just leave. No, just leave the hall, leave our country. I don't want you here in the room or in my country. He later went on to say, stop Britain from becoming a black colony. Get the foreigners out. Get the wogs out. Get the coons out. Keep Britain white. He finished with, listen to me, man. I think we should send them all back. The backlash was swift. His outburst helped spark the Rock Against Racism movement, as we said, a musical uprising against hate, division and hypocrisy. Years later, Eric Clapton admitted his shame, saying it didn't make sense, and he's since expressed regret and donated to anti-racist causes. Eric didn't bank on what it was going to do.
No, sometimes you need something like that, don't you, to provide the catalyst for something good.
It didn't have the effect that he was intending. No. It actually had the opposite effect because it ignited, it lit the fuse of what was to become Rock Against Racism, right? Which involved young people primarily getting together to say that's not what we think, that's not what we want. There's the massive concert in Victoria Park here, 100,000 kids out, and there's black bands and white bands on the same bill.
Yeah. Rock Against Racism was the catalyst that brought them all together. But they were there and they knew about each other. They just hadn't come together yet. But each cultural grouping was doing it in their own way. But it was that gig there in Victoria Park that kind of brought those two things together.
But it inspires Dammers, Jerry Dammers, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
I think it inspired everybody, really. The main thing that I took as inspiration was not just Polly and how she was approaching that whole kind of thing. It was seeing Steel Pulse on Top of the Pops. You know, even today that would be shocking if somebody turned up on a music programme with pillowcases over their head with the eyes cut out and singing about the KKK. And the actual chorus is Ku Klux Klan. I mean, actually using the words. There's nothing vague about it. It's absolutely there and dead on. And it was like all those things came together. You can say this. And of course, you know, there's the Clash as well, who were taking that whole idea of mixing reggae and, punk for, rock music really, the punky element of it, and running with it. You know, what they were doing was social reportage. And it was what we were doing. We just didn't know it then. We've been doing it ever since. I don't know any other thing to do, really.
And you got this constellation of events and people and music and youth culture. And of course, against the background of 70s Britain with the National Front, Anti-Nazi League, okay, obviously taking them on, Thatcher, the unions, you know, the sus laws, you know, the miners' strike. In this times, you know, when high unemployment, black people were the first people to lose their jobs, right?
And you'd got apartheid going on.
Feverish times.
Oh, totally.
And out of all that, Jerry Dammers is a producer, the Specials, that's Single Gangsters, and then Selector on the B-side, the Selector's Born, and then you step up front.
Yes. Myself and Lawton and some other people at that time, our drummer, Charles H. Bembridge, he was there, but he was playing keyboards, I think, or bass at the time. And Silverton Hutchinson, who was had just been, I don't know, kicked out by Jerry from the Specials, he was floating around and was, you know, had come along and done a couple of sessions with us as drummer. And were feeling out some of the songs and stuff. But the main person really would have been Desmond Brown, who played the keyboards in the Selector. And he was there. And Linville Golding just walked into one of the rehearsals one day and just picked out who he thought ought to go and meet this person called Neil Davis, who none of us knew, but we kind of knew had done this track, The Selector, which was on the B-side of Gangsters. And off we went. We never went back. And just met up in this front room in Hillfields, 2 up, 2 down. And all the people that were in that room would become The Selector.
Here is a sidebar about the two-tone movement and Selector. The two-tone movement was a British musical phenomenon that emerged in the late 70s, fusing Jamaican ska with punk rock and new wave influences. It was as much a social and political statement as a musical genre, advocating racial unity and addressing the economic hardship of Britain during the Thatcher era. Its roots lie in first wave ska, which originated in Jamaica in the late 50s and 60s, and that early sound pioneered by artists like the Scatolites, Prince Buster and Desmond Decker blended Caribbean mento, calypso and American R&B. And when Jamaican immigrants arrived in Britain in the 60s, they brought the music with them, influencing local musicians and audiences. By the late 70s, Britain was experiencing economic recession and racial tensions. The punk movement had introduced a DIY ethos and rebellious spirit, which resonated with working class youth, and musicians began merging ska danceable rhythm with punk's raw energy, creating the two-tone sound. And the movement was spearheaded by legend Jerry Dammers, keyboardist and songwriter of the Specials. In 1979, he founded the Two-Tone record label, named after the black and white checkerboard imagery that symbolised racial unity. And the label became the driving force behind Two-Tone, signing bands that shared the musical and ideological vision. The bands often wore mod-style suits, pork pie hats, checkerboard patterns. Specials, the quintessential Two-Tone band, of course, delivered politically charged songs like Ghost Town, which captured the despair of 80s Britain. Madness, although they lean more towards pop, of course, helped popularise Two-Tone with hits like One Step Beyond and Baggy Trousers, and of course the Selector, led by Pauline Black. The Selector's name, of course, comes from the Jamaican term for a DJ who selects tracks to play. Initially formed by Noel Davis and John Bradbury, the drummer for the Specials, Pauline Black joined as lead vocalist. And they were off. In 1980, the band released their debut album, Too Much Pressure, with hits like On My Radio, 3 Minute Hero and Missing Words, high-energy ska rhythms, socially conscious lyrics. They disbanded in 1982 after their second album, Celebrate the Bullet, and Pauline pursued a solo career in acting and television. Other members moved on to other projects, but they reformed in the early 90s, and they've been going pretty much since with various different versions of the group. They toured, they released several albums, keeping the Two-Tone spirit alive. Your transformation is quite extraordinary. As you say, it's not maybe as kind of simplistic as this, but there's you before and there's you in the Selector. I mean, you seem like a different being.
It's all the same person. People want you to be one thing. Who is one thing?
Right. It is quite striking, I think, in the film.
In what way?
Your look is completely different. The way you perform or the way you sing is completely different. And then, of course, you've got you as the front person of this band of 6 guys, right? You're out there, right? Now, of course, there wasn't that much footage of you before.
I mean, if you looked at, say, the Stranglers, when they first started, they just looked like art students, didn't they? With a young person. And then kind of, you know, when they'd all evolved into their Men in Black, they're completely different. But they're men. They're allowed to do it. They're allowed to do it. They're allowed to try on personas. They are allowed to kind of, you know, they have this kind of this confidence there to do that, to inhabit these things. Women aren't allowed to do that in the same way. You have to take the space. And once you take the space, you're going to then maybe blossom into this other thing, which is not maybe what you were before. But they're just facets of a personality.
For you, it felt an organic evolution.
All of it feels completely organic. I know who I am now when I go on stage. I know totally who I am. I mean, I can go from offloading T-shirts to somebody at the merch stand and within 15 minutes be on stage and be inhabiting that wholly. I think it's possibly something I got from my birth mother, because when I actually discovered her, I mean, I was in my 40s when I discovered her, she could slip from one accent into another in quite an embarrassing way, depending on who she was with. She could be sounding like completely Dagenham one minute, even though she'd spent 30-odd years in Australia, and Dame Edna Everage the next.
Combination. You don't seem like that to me, though. You don't seem like the sort of person who's going to kind of, you know, chameleon-like adapt to your environment in that sort of way. I'm sure you're very good with people who you're around, but you seem like you're always going to be yourself to me.
Who is yourself?
That's the
you
question.
Know? I mean, everybody has some kind of front that they present
We
to the
do.
world.
We have a sense also when we're being authentic
Yes.
consistently.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm at my most authentic when I'm on a stage. It's there I feel comfortable.
You mentioned your birth mum, and I want to come back to her as we sort of wind it up. But if we fast forward, the Selector finish, and you have a whole other series of careers. You become an actor, you become a TV presenter, you play Billie Holiday on the stage, solo artist. The thing that we've not really talked about is your name change.
Oh, yes.
Let's just talk about that. You're born Belinda Magnus. You join a family where you're Pauline Vickers, and then you become Pauline Black. Is that the moment of transformation?
Yeah, largely, I think. I mean, for me, blackness was something that had to be inhabited. It wasn't a state that I grew up in. My inhabitation of it was how I felt as though I fitted into a black world. I don't fit into a black world, but then I don't fit into a white world either. You have to find a way. You know, I've met people who've grown up mixed race but identify as white and can't understand why they can't identify as white because they don't know anything about the black world kind of thing. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to know about the black world. It was a contrary moment on my part. I just thought my family never call me black. They don't like the word. They shy away from it as though, you know, it will burn you or something. If you touch that word, it's really dreadful.
Well, you said that they'd said that you're not black, you're coloured.
Well, yeah.
And then when you did have your name changed, it was like dropping a bomb, and I've never really been forgiven.
No, and I haven't been forgiven. I mean, it was... I get reminded by who's always telling me, don't you forget what family you come from and what we did for you. Even
Really?
at my age, and he's younger than I am. That was the last exchange that we had on Facebook, and that was about 10 years ago.
Okay. You tell this scene about when you go into the loos at Selfridges to try jacket on or...
I bought a jacket. I bought it at Prada, and I went in there to try it on. I'm standing there. It's just me admiring myself in this jacket. This woman just comes out of one of the toilets and decides that I'm the toilet attendant.
Ticks you off. See, ticks you off because there's not a no loo rule. Hey, you know, get it together.
But I mean, without even thinking about it, she sees a black face. And they're there to sort of clean or fetch and carry for someone or another. That has been her experience of it.
Coming up against that also in the acting world, in terms of casting, you fall into a kind of depression, and you talk about this moment on Bond Street Tube Station when it's like another signal moment. It's like, do I want to carry on at all? You decide that you do, and as a consequence of maybe even of that experience on Bond Street Tube Station, you decide you've got to track down your natural mother. You did it. You found her. What was that like?
Quite strange, really, because it was after a whole rigmarole to find her. Because she'd married an Irishman called Murphy. But it's the first time anyone uses the word Belinda to me. And then I thought, what have I done? What have I done? Because I'd written her a very, very long letter, very carefully explaining that, if I was going to embarrass her in some way, I didn't want to do that. This could just stay between us. I didn't want to drop some bomb into her family, and they'd gone to Australia. And I just had this voice on the end of the phone going, Belinda, in this really broad Australian accent. It was bizarre. And she called me Belinda for at least the first 10 years of us knowing each other. Yeah. She couldn't be dissuaded from it. My mother was a little bit odd.
I mean, and what was it like for her, out of the blue, as it were, out of the black, your daughter, after all these years, has got in contact with you?
I don't know how it was for them because it happened so far away. I have a half-sister out there, and she got very angry at my mother that she hadn't been told about me. Although my mother was born into a Jewish family, by this time she had ended up, she'd been through varying religions, but she'd ended up as a Jehovah's Witness. And my sister was staunchly Jehovah's Witness. That caused a bit of a problem because, I mean, both my half-sister and my half-brother, they'd grown up as Australian, and within their church, they had been taught from a very young age that there should be no fornication before marriage. And then mum not only turns up with a baby out of wedlock, but as a black one as well. So that was quite a lot for them to take on.
And also, on the second, you got to take on the fact that you're Jewish, sort of.
That didn't really impinge upon me at first.
You also, of course, now find out about your mum's relationship with your father.
Well, yes. I mean, I had to work up to that. We had to go there before.
Right.
I mean, I didn't suddenly blurt out, and by the way, who's my dad? But anyway, she told me while I was in Australia, I spent a month there with them. That was strange because I think for adopted people, what they don't realise is that when you find a birth parent, they don't just come singly. They come with this whole heap of other people, and you're not prepared for that. And there were loads of them. And they all wanted to know me. Mainly, I think, like, oh, look, here's Eileen's secret kind of thing,
Okay, but I mean, some of them maybe knew about Selector and about your career.
No, only one of them
Okay.
knew about that. And they were a couple of weed smoking. One had never joined the JWs and the other one had been thrown out, kind of thing.
Did your mum stay in contact with your dad?
Not at all. She was 17.
Right, okay.
She was 17.
So she'd had a...
I think it was a one-night stand.
Right.
And probably, because I remember her very clearly saying to me, well, I knew I couldn't take him home. Her words. So I could only assume that somewhere on Dagenham Heathway Station...
Let's try and imagine somewhere a bit more romantic.
No, I think it was that.
Maybe in some leafy glade.
No, it was no. I don't think we're talking leafy glade here. No.
Right. Okay. Well, listen. The denouement, the sort of happy ending to this part of the story is, as a consequence of this, you track down your dad and tell us about your dad.
I never met him, so he died the year before that I found out who that he was, but he came with 17 children by 8 different ladies, and I got to know one of his wives, and from that I got to know a half-sister whose mother was also married to him, and all of them are telling you different facets about him. The biggest thing was that he was a prince, Prince Gordon Oludosiu Denley, and his father was, for want of a better word, the king of what a principality used to be. Oshogbo is known for its culture, its art, music, all of those kind of things. Some wonderful artists have come from there. And there is a wonderful sacred forest that is there that was all carved, and that's the sort of place that they come from. The grandfather, the king, he had 20 wives and apparently over 100 children. But my father was the firstborn of him, and I'm the firstborn of my father. So...
You're a princess. Or as you say, a Jewish princess, in fact.
A Jewish princess, yeah.
But it's quite an extraordinary... It's not an end to your story. Your story's going on. But it was like quite an extraordinary sort of moment, isn't it? I was just baffled and sort of like bamboozled by the amount of step-brothers, half-sisters, you've sort of tribe, basically.
Yes, I'm regularly bamboozled by the whole thing because, of course, with Facebook these days, they can talk to you.
Right, you've got your Australian family, you've got African family, you've got your Essex family. And
by the time I found all this out, I was in my mid-40s. And I think if I'd found it all out when I was about 20 or something, I would have been a bit overwhelmed by it.
But we didn't really get time to talk about what it's like being the woman in a band of 6 guys. Which must have been quite something.
I never thought of it like that. We were all just full on. We were full on personalities all the time. And that was the wonderful thing about that band. Same with the specials as well. Everyone was very individual personalities. That's why it worked. And you don't often find that with bands. And our punch-ups were real. And I was in there and I was enjoying it.
You look like you're still enjoying it.
Well, yeah, we don't do that anymore. But I mean,
Still touring, still playing, you're still doing your thing. The film's touring. At the club when we saw the film, it was interesting to see the audience, actually. There's some famous people there who regard you as somebody who's influenced them, right?
Well, Skin was there.
I heard what she said on the way out. I snapped her standing next to a big picture of David Bowie about the reception.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
I said, can I take a picture in front of David Bowie? And she said, yeah, I used to tour with him. I can't remember exactly what she said, but she was, I would say, deeply moved. Don't want to embarrass you, but I think for her, you were a figurehead in some sort of sense.
As soon as she appeared on the scene, I just zeroed in on her and think, gosh, she's phenomenal. I mean, the whole way she looked, the whole way she sounds, the whole way she holds herself, all of those kinds of things. I'm always very, very deeply moved by other black female singers, be it Billie Holiday or whether it's Skin or whether it's Polystyrene. They are all part of something. And it's a whole, and it's something that is very, very rarely explored as a thing.
Pauline Black, thanks very much for coming to the Bureau of Lost Culture.
Thank you, Stephen. It's been very enjoyable.
That was fun, but also very thought-provoking. I mean, the thought of growing up at that time in Britain, in a place like she did, as the only one, is quite something, isn't it? I mean, we all think we're the only one, I think, when we're teenagers, or a lot of us do. But she really was in this situation. And quite a story to, grab your life by the balls, as it were, and, rechristen yourself in such a dramatic way, and to go on this journey. Something of an urban modern fairy tale, I think, with this discovery of her parentage, and especially the discovery of her father. And in fact, she's a princess. It's a sort of dream, isn't it, in a way, a fairy tale dream for someone. Emma was adopted and found out that in fact I was a princess, but a kind of dark journey too, to go through those times and the pressures that she was under for much of her youth. Amazing stuff. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Links to Pauline and her book and the film Two-Tone Story in the show notes. Thanks again to Adrian for unearthing that track that he made in collaboration with Pauline back in the day. Terrific. Be in touch if you want to suggest people for this show, stories for us to cover as we keep delving deeper and deeper into the counterculture. And I will see you, hear you, meet you further down the road, round the bend, and over the hillsides for more tales from the underground.